too. So that's my announcement, and we'll get right into the presentation by Grascen with CSI. Looking forward to that. Appreciate you coming out today. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for having me, and thank you to Michelle for inviting me. I really appreciate it. My name is Grascen Shidemantle, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Science Institute. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about the water quality monitoring that we're doing in Cayuga County. So today I'll give you a little bit of background information on CSI, and then I'll talk about our 3 monitoring partnerships in Cayuga County. I'll specifically talk about how they work, where we're monitoring, and how you can access the data from those programs. Then I'll end with a little bit of a discussion. I want to know how CSI and WQMA and our partners in Cayuga County can work better together to address water quality issues. So we'll go right into some background on CSI. CSI is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to empower communities to protect water quality through volunteer stream and lake monitoring. All the samples that we receive are processed through our New York State Department of Health and EPA certified water testing lab. And as I mentioned, our volunteer water monitoring partnerships are at the core of what we do. We do lake and stream chemistry monitoring, harmful algal bloom monitoring, and benthic macroinvertebrate monitoring. The data from these different monitoring programs is uploaded onto our free public water quality database where anybody in the public can access the data. And what's the good of all the science if we're not educating people about it, if we're not letting people know about it? So we do offer a number of outreach and education events as well. So water quality monitoring is at the heart of what we do. We have 4 different monitoring partnerships, and on this map here, the different icons represent where we're currently sampling throughout the Finger Lakes region. Our work is largely centered in the Cayuga Lake watershed, but we do have partnerships with other lake associations like Seneca Lake Pure Waters, Cayuga Lake Association, and Canandaigua Lake Association to help them out with their stream monitoring. Today, I'm only going to be talking about our synoptic stream and lake, harmful algal bloom, and biomonitoring partnerships. But if you do have questions about our Red Flag Monthly Stream Monitoring Program, I'm happy to answer those at the end. All right, so we'll get right into our largest and longest running program, which is our Synoptic Stream and Lake Monitoring Partnership. This program started back in 2002 with our Fall and Virgil Creek Monitoring Partnership, and it continues until today. And at this point, we now have over a dozen streams in the Cayuga Lake watershed that we're monitoring through this program. The purpose of our Synoptic Stream and Lake program is to produce regulatory quality stream and lake data that can help to inform water resource management decisions, as well as keep the public informed about the health of their local water resources. In this program, our volunteers are monitoring their streams for nutrients, sediments, bacteria, salt, and other water quality indicators. And the way the program works is volunteers work in teams based on the stream that they're monitoring. And all on the same day, they collect samples from different points along a given stream. And they'll do this 3 to 4 times a year, depending on the stream. They then transport those samples to our lab, where our scientists analyze the samples. Within Cayuga County, we're monitoring quite a few streams. So we monitor Yager Creek, Straight Gully Creek, and at this very moment, we have volunteers monitoring Deans Creek, Paynes Creek, Mill Creek, and Town Line Creek. They have an event this morning. And we also monitor Salmon Creek. And not just the portion that you see here in Cayuga County, we also monitor the rest of Salmon Creek in Tompkins County. And I do just want to give a little shout out and acknowledgement to Cayuga County because they helped support this stream monitoring. This would not be possible to cover this wide of an area without the support from the county. So thank you so much. Okay, so you might be interested in seeing some of the data that we've collected. So I'm just going to show you a little bit. There's so much data we have, but I'm going to start off with some nutrient data because I think that is of interest to a lot of folks around here. So first, I'll show you the results for our nitrate and nitrite collection in 2022. So on this graph here, you can see all of the different streams that we're monitoring in Cayuga County, and those are represented by the blue bars. The brown bar represents the average concentration of nitrogen for all of the streams in the Cayuga Lake watershed. This way you can kind of see how the streams in Cayuga County are comparing to the whole watershed. This pink line here is the Hudson Basin River Watch guidance value for a healthy stream. It's 1 milligram per liter. I will point out this is not an enforceable value. This is just to give you an idea of what would be considered elevated. So the first thing that stands out to me when I look at this graph is that it looks like on average, all of the streams are exceeding the guidance value, and most of them are either close to the average we see for the watershed or above, especially Townline Creek, Mill Creek, and Deans Creek. Now, that's just one part of the equation when we're talking about nutrients, and a lot of folks are thinking about phosphorus right now in regards to the Cayuga Lake draft total maximum daily load. So next we'll take a look at the total phosphorus results for Cayuga County. We have the same kind of setup for the graph where the blue bars represent the streams that we're monitoring in Cayuga County, and the brown bar represents the average total phosphorus for all streams in the watershed. Here there's two different guidance values because again, there's no enforceable nutrient limits in New York State. So the DEC did use 20 micrograms per liter for the Cayuga Lake TMDL. So that's the guidance value in pink. And then in purple, we have the EPA's guidance value for streams in our ecoregion. Again, not enforceable nutrient values, but useful for perspective. So here we see that in terms of the guidance values, several of the streams do exceed both guidance values, and several are above the average for all of the streams in Cayuga Lake, particularly Deans Creek and Great Gully, Salmon, and Yager Creek. So if this data has piqued your interest and is leaving you with a lot of questions, I have some good news for you, and that's that there are infinite ways on our database to explore the data in more detail. And so what I'm going to do next is deviate away from this PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you how you can navigate our database online so you can explore this data in more detail on your own. So I will do that now. And I'm actually going to go to our main website so you can figure out how to get here on your own. Oh, I have to make it switch my screens. Okay, so this is the main page of our website. This is communityscience.org. And if you wanted to visit our database, there's this top banner at the top that says CSI water quality data. You'll want to click on streams and lakes data, and that'll take you to the home page of our streams and lakes database. The first thing you'll see is a graph which shows all of the monitoring locations where we've ever collected a sample in all of New York. For our purposes, we're most interested today in the Cayuga Lake watershed, so you would select that from the regional watershed list. And it will repopulate with a map that only shows the sampling locations in the Cayuga Lake watershed. Then from there, there's a table that lists all of the different streams that we're monitoring in the Cayuga Lake watershed. So let's say you're interested in Yager Creek. You could select it from the table. And now you'll see a map that only shows our sampling locations on Yager Creek. Now you might notice there's some different colored icons here. The blue icons represent our synoptic sampling sites. This means we're regularly collecting samples here. The green icons represent investigative sites, which means maybe we collected a sample there once or twice, and that would have been in response to a community concern or a volunteer, but we don't do routine monitoring there. If you scroll down below this map, you'll see a graph. And on this graph, you can see all of the sampling sites along this creek. And the values represented here are the average of any water quality indicator for all of the events we've ever had. And it's separated by base flow average and stormwater average. So let's say, for example, you are interested in E. coli on Yager Creek. you could select that from the drop-down menu, and the graph would repopulate with the results for average E. coli out of all of the monitoring events we've ever had on Yager Creek. And say you're only interested in base flow, you can click off stormwater and the graph will adjust, so you're only looking at one or the other. Okay, so maybe you're looking at this graph and you're thinking, oh boy, the E. coli on average is pretty high on Yager Creek. Is that normal? You know, maybe 5 years ago it was really high, but maybe it's lower now. A way you can explore that is by scrolling down to this events table. And this will show you every event where we've ever monitored Yager Creek. September 26, 2022 is the last event that we had. You could click on that, and what will happen is you'll see a new graph pop up, and it will show you the results for every single water quality indicator that we monitored on that date. And so this graph gets a little bit busy. So if you're only interested in one or two analytes, again, you can click them on or off. So if we're looking at E. coli, you can see how the E. coli stacked up for just this most recent monitoring event. And you can scroll over the bars and it will tell you the results. So at Yager Creek, Large Ridge, there were 700 colonies per 100 milliliters at this site. If you like data in table format better, you can scroll down below and you can see all of the data put together in a table for each of the locations. So maybe you're interested in this Yager Creek Large Ridge Road or Large Ridge site. Is 700 colonies, is that typical to see there? It's an elevated level for a base flow event. So you could explore that by clicking on the location. And what you'll see is the location on a map. And then there'll be a graph below that will show you the results for every single monitoring event. And you can sort that by whichever water quality indicator you're interested in. So if we're following what we've been doing before, we could select E. coli, and we can see how it's stacked up in the past. Again, you can filter it if you only want to see base flow or stormwater, so that it only shows you one or the other. Sometimes stormwater is so high it can be difficult to see the base flow events, so that can be useful. For a lot of water quality indicators, we sometimes see seasonal trends and when they're higher and lower, and that's something you can also explore on this page. If you scroll down, you'll see that there's a graph which represents the monthly average of any water quality indicator that you're interested in on that site for all of the monitoring events. So here we can see that in July and October, we tend to see higher E. coli levels. But this emphasizes the importance of long-term monitoring because we've only been monitoring Yager Creek since 2017. And so these averages in many cases are only a count of 1 or 2, which isn't really all that meaningful. So in order to be able to detect these powerful seasonal trends, we need more continued long-term monitoring. So that's a quick overview of the different features you can explore on our database. I'm going to return to the PowerPoint, but if you have any questions or if you want to look at any of the data together at any point, you can ask me at the end or we can set up a time to meet later. Okay, now I'm going to transition to talking about another one of our monitoring programs, which is our harmful algal bloom monitoring program. This program started back in 2018, and we're very proud to collaborate with the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network on this program. The purpose of our Cayuga Lake harmful algal bloom monitoring program is to collect actionable data on cyanobacteria blooms, protect public health, and relay that information and testing results quickly to the public. The way this program works is our HABs Harriers, that's what we call our volunteers, perform weekly shoreline surveys for HABs. If they see a HAB, they report it to CSI via our HABs hotline, and then they collect a sample and transport it to our lab. In our lab, we're testing those HAB samples so that we can identify what genera of cyanobacteria are present in the bloom. We measure chlorophyll A to determine the density of the bloom. And then we also measure cyanotoxins, specifically microcystin, to determine the toxicity of the blooms. It used to be that data was reported on our HABs reporting page on our website, but now that bloom information will be uploaded to our new HABs database, which I'll be giving you a sneak peek of in just a bit. Before we do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the HABs monitoring that's happening in Cayuga County. So on this graph here, you can see in the blue shaded regions, all of the shoreline segments that CSI volunteers are monitoring. And they're currently covering about 53% of the shoreline in Cayuga County. Now, members of the public can also report blooms. So just because a segment isn't regularly monitored doesn't mean we're not detecting blooms in that area. But with that being said, we're always looking for volunteers to help fill in the gaps. So if you or somebody you know is interested, I've put the contact information for our Cayuga Lake Harmful Algal Bloom Program Coordinator, Grace Haynes. Her email is right here if you are interested. And again, I'd just like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge Cayuga County for supporting this HABs monitoring. Something I love about this program is we receive equal support from Seneca, Cayuga, and Tompkins County for this program. So it's a really inspiring example of how the different counties can work together to help protect the lake of our shared watershed. So next I'll share a little bit of data on what we've been seeing for HABs on all of Cayuga Lake and in Cayuga County. So on this graph, you can see our different years of our monitoring program and then the number of cyanobacteria blooms that happened within each of those years. The green bars represent the number of blooms that were reported on all of Cayuga Lake, and the blue bars represent the number of HABs that were reported to us in Cayuga County. And so the first thing you might notice is that from 2018 to 2021, the HABs were steadily increasing in both all of Cayuga Lake and in Cayuga County itself. But then in 2022, we saw our first drop in blooms since we've started monitoring. And we see that also reflected not just in all of the lake, but in Cayuga County as well. There is so much I could say about our harmful algal bloom program and the interesting results that we've found over the last few years, but it's really better left for the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network's Cayuga Lake Spring Conference, which will be on May 18th. Our Cayuga Lake HABs Program Coordinator, Grace, will be giving a really excellent presentation, which gives a great summary of HABs on Cayuga Lake since the start of our monitoring program with a focus on 2022. So I encourage you to attend that conference hosted by the Watershed Network. Okay, now I'm going to show you how you're going to be able to access data like this on your own in the very near future. And that is on our HABs database. So on the front page of our HABs database, you'll see a map that looks like this. And this map has icons that represent every bloom that's ever been reported to Community Science Institute since the start of our program in 2018. You can filter this map so it can either show you all of the blooms from the beginning of our program, blooms reported in the last month, the last 2 weeks, or the last 7 days. These different icons are different colors, and those colors correspond to the toxicity of the blooms. And already from the landing page, you might be picking up on a trend where a lot of the purple icons are at the north end of the lake. Those purple icons represent blooms that are highly toxic. Those are the most toxic blooms that we're seeing. And in fact, that is what our data reflect, is that the more toxic blooms are at the northern end of the lake. So already you can start to pick up on trends just from this homepage. On this page, you'll also see a tally of the number of blooms reported to us since the start of our monitoring program. And there'll also be a table of HABs events which link to lakeshore segments and to blooms themselves. If you want to explore trends in HABs along a certain portion of the lake, you can visit a segment page. On the segment page, there'll be a map, and there'll be icons that illustrate each bloom that has ever been reported on that given segment. There'll also be a graph on the page, which will allow you to visualize monthly trends in HABs during each year of our monitoring program. So the color-coded bars reflect the years, and then the labels on the X or the horizontal axis reflect the months. So you can start to detect seasonal trends in blooms on a given segment. If you're only interested in perhaps a given year or comparing 2 years, you can interact with this graph like the graphs on our Stream and Lake database so that it's only showing certain years of the data. If you want to get more information about a given bloom, You can visit an event page or a bloom page. And on that page, there'll be a map which will show the location of the bloom. And it will also have a table which outlines the where, when, and what of the bloom. The what will include things like what kind of cyanobacteria were present or dominant in the bloom. And it will also include the chlorophyll A concentration and the microcystin concentration. These pages will also include a photo of the bloom. So that's an overview of our HABs database. It will be public by the start of our HABs monitoring season. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out. It's our newest database, so there will be bugs, there will be things we work through, but we'll work through them together. Okay, next I'm going to move on to talking about our third and final monitoring partnership in Cayuga County, which is our biomonitoring partnership. The purpose of our biomonitoring program is to determine the ecological and the long-term health of our local streams, while also educating community members about the amazing biodiversity that exists within these streams in their backyards. The way this program works is volunteers collect samples of benthic macroinvertebrates or stream bugs in the field during the summer. They then take these samples and sort and identify them in CSI's lab through open lab nights during the winter and the spring of the following year. And that's what these volunteers are doing in this photo here. The reason they're sorting and identifying is so that they can determine a number of different ecological metrics that give us some information about the health of the stream. So they want to know how many different families are present and how tolerant to pollution are those families. They want to know how closely the community we've collected mimics an ideal community in New York State. And then we take those different metrics and we put them into one metric called the biological assessment profile. And that creates a scale from non-impacted to severely impacted. And it's a really easy way to understand how is the stream doing from an ecological perspective. We don't have a database for our BMI data yet. It is in the works, but in the meantime, you can access the results for this program on our website. So I'm going to have to escape from here. Okay, so this is what our biological monitoring results page looks like. And on here, you can see that there are a number of different icons that link to results from each individual year. So if we want to look at our 2021 results, it pops up a PDF which outlines those different ecological metrics that I mentioned before. Is that helpful? Okay. The metrics that I mentioned before for each creek that we monitored in 2021. And it breaks down the impact by each of those metrics. But if you want a quick summary, looking at the biological assessment profile value is a good way to start. So if we just quickly scan through what we saw in 2021, you'll see that all of the streams were either slightly impacted or saw no impact. And if you were to look at data from previous years, that's pretty consistent with what we see both over time in the Cayuga Lake watershed and throughout the watershed as well. So from an ecological perspective, we're doing pretty good for these benthic macroinvertebrates. Okay, now I'm going to return to the PowerPoint and I'm going to show you a little bit more data from this program by focusing on a site that we're monitoring on Great Gully Creek. So in 2021 and 2022, we monitored Great Gully Creek just upstream of Route 90. And we found something really interesting, which is we weren't able to collect enough insects in the sample to be able to come up with what would be considered an accurate result. We just need 100 organisms, and in some locations and different streams, we get thousands or hundreds of organisms. But in 2021 and in 2022, we weren't able to reach that 100 organism level. Now, my biomonitoring coordinator shared with me that she thinks maybe this is because there had been some recent storms, and if there's a lot of flow, it can wash those organisms out. But the only way to know if this is typical for the site or if perhaps it was due to the weather is to continue monitoring here. So continued monitoring at this site will be really important to determine is it normal for there to not be a lot of organisms, which would be concerning, or is it just because the weather was weird those 2 years? If you or somebody you know would be interested in getting involved with this monitoring, I did put the contact information for Adriana, who's our biomonitoring coordinator here. We would love to have more help monitoring Great Gully Creek for benthic macroinvertebrates. Okay, so that's the end of me talking about our different monitoring partnerships, how you can access the data. Now I'd kind of like to open it up for a discussion based on some questions that I've been bothering Michelle with lately. And that is, how can CSI and WQMA and other partners in Cayuga County, how can we work together efficiently? For those of you who might not know, I've only been at CSI for a year, so I don't know everybody yet. So I'm still trying to figure out how we all work together here in the watershed. So I have 2 specific questions that I want to pose to everybody today. The first is, as you can imagine, there's lots of data crossing my desk every single day. And so from time to time, we find something that raises our eyebrows or maybe causes a volunteer to reach out and say, hey, I saw at this monitoring event, E. coli was really high. I want to know from those of you here today, what would you like CSI to do when we find those concerning results for streams in Cayuga County? Would you like us to reach out to one of you? What would the process be? Now, I do just want to caveat that for our harmful algal bloom program, all HABs are reported to the Cayuga County Health Department pretty much in near real time. So I'm referring more to our stream and lake chemistry data. And then the second question I have is a little bit more general. And whenever new stream data is published on our database, I send an email to the volunteers in that group and let them know, hey, the results from your June 23rd event are now available. Here's some things that stuck out to me. Would somebody from WQMA or anybody in the room here today like to be included in those emails so that you know when we have new data published on the Cayuga County streams?